You are finally out of their reach, and you have never felt more shadowed by them. Carl Jung gives that shadowing a name. When the empath does not turn back, the narcissist does not pursue. They do something quieter and far stranger. They reconstruct you in the dark, sustained by what Jung called the shadow. You remember the quiet that followed your leaving. No pursuit, no begging, just a silence so complete that something inside you softly caves in. By the end, you will understand exactly what that silence was concealing. You will see why stillness replaced the chase and what that stillness truly meant. You will recognize the exact instant your shared past was rewritten and why you were forced to play the villain so they could keep standing. You will understand the quiet thing they construct in private once you are gone for good, the version of you they hold on to while the real you walks away unburdened. And you will come to see why this hidden ritual belongs entirely to the shadow, the rejected self that grows loudest in an empty room. The empath walks away. The narcissist secretly holds onto a phantom. By the end, you will know which of you has actually found freedom. Before any theory begins, start with something you have already lived. Days following an argument, in the shower, or driving alone, you have caught yourself completing the fight out loud, delivering the flawless retort to someone who is nowhere near you. All of us keep a small replica of those who wounded us and replay the scene until the pain dulls. For you, that replica fades, the wound seals, and the inner voice eventually settles. Now imagine that exact private mechanism, only the fading never happens, running for years inside someone who cannot release the actual you. Hold on to that image. It is the foundation everything else here is built upon. You braced for some kind of response after everything that happened. Part of you expected the outburst, the lengthy message, the friend dispatched to plead their case, the late-night call where their voice would crack at just the right beat. Instead, you received an unbroken stillness, day after day, and in that absence of any signal, you began performing the cruelest arithmetic imaginable. You started questioning whether your significance had been a fiction you told yourself all along. You have gone back over your own conduct since, searching for the offense that justified this silence. There was no offense. You did not invent it. What looked like indifference was merely the outer shell of something enormous, and that shell was the only part still intact. Their sense of being real was never built from within. It was pieced together moment to moment out of you, out of how you responded. Your worry confirmed their power. Your forgiveness confirmed their goodness. Even your anger confirmed that they had the ability to affect you, and anything capable of moving you is proven to exist. You were not their companion so much as their proof. You were the daily renewed evidence that someone was actually in there. So when you went silent, you did not merely pull back your affection. You shut off the instrument they relied on to find themselves in the world. Consider the specific signs, how a single neutral message from you could launch them into a full campaign to win you back, and how that campaign was never truly about your emotions, but about reigniting the signal. You believed you were having a disagreement. You were being treated as a mirror that had started to cloud over, and a clouded mirror demands polishing no matter the cost. Jung described the dread of an ego that confuses borrowed authority for something it owns outright. Once the source disappears, that dread has no language and no outline. It cannot be admitted because admitting it would mean confessing that the authority was never truly theirs. So it retreats beneath the surface, and the visible self above learns to remain perfectly motionless. This is why the exterior stays composed while everything underneath gives way. Understood properly, the silence stops resembling peace. What you are actually witnessing is the freeze of a mind that has lost all sense of direction, holding its breath so the buried panic stays hidden. The needle is spinning. The room has turned cold. But cold does not mean it is over. There is a reason behind the absence of pursuit, and it has nothing to do with moving forward. Here is the descent ahead, so you understand why staying until the end is worth it. First, the mask, and why your leaving caused it to crumble. Then the rewriting, where you silently became the antagonist of a story you were never permitted to read. Then the watching that wears the disguise of love, but is not love at all. Then the collapse no one in their circle is ever allowed to witness. And at the very bottom, the single act they conceal from every person they have ever known. The act Jung's framework explains more precisely than any contemporary label could. The thing that determines which one of you genuinely walks away free. Stay until the bottom. That is where everything turns. To start, return to the face they wore on the day you first met them. When you first encountered them, they seemed put together with unusual precision. The confidence that surfaced a moment too soon, the charm that appeared to cost them nothing at all, the certainty about their identity, delivered so seamlessly that you stopped raising the questions you would normally ask. You mistook all of it for a solid foundation. It was only a surface, and surfaces are remarkably skilled at imitating depth under the right light. Jung had an exact term for that surface, the persona. In his framework, the persona starts as something unremarkable, even essential. A practical agreement between an individual and the world, a face shaped to win the acceptance the collective offers those who present the expected form. Everyone carries one. We require one simply to move through life. The real trouble starts somewhere else entirely, in the space between people who wear the mask loosely and those left with nothing beneath it. Through the persona, a person attempts to present themselves in one way or another, Jung wrote, or conceals himself behind a mask, or may even construct a deliberate persona as a fortification. A fortification, not a window, not a doorway. Something erected against whatever lies behind it. Here is what a fortification needs that no one ever explains. It needs a face pushing from the opposite side to give it the appearance of solidity. It needs an observer. It needs a surface where it can be mirrored back. A pair of eyes continually affirming that the costume is the actual person wearing it. For years, you served as that surface. Your attention was the weight against which the persona pressed itself. And for as long as you kept watching, the fortification held its form and felt, even to them, like an authentic self. Then you departed, and the surface it had been leaning against simply vanished. With nothing left to brace it, the constructed face began separating from the skin underneath. And the real danger Jung warned of was never the simple act of wearing a persona. It was the gradual disaster of a person merging completely with it, mistaking the persona for the living core inside, until eventually the audience leaves and there is nothing left underneath to return to. They did not just lose you, they lost the only thing keeping their face attached. So, when they think of you now, the ache that catches even them off guard is not grief over a person. They are mourning the version of themselves they once located in your gaze. That version is gone. It will not return. They did not lose a partner. They lost the mirror that had convinced them they were genuine. But a mind that has lost its mirror does not sit calmly with that absence. It searches quickly and quietly underground for a narrative that makes the loss tolerable. And every narrative like that requires the same starting ingredient. It requires a villain. It comes to you indirectly, the way these things always do. A mutual acquaintance repeats something with a strange new twist to it. A line about you that you half recognize, told from an angle that turns your patience into weakness and your departure into an ambush. You hear that your boundaries were really control, that your exhaustion was actually contempt, that the silence you held while dying quietly inside has, in this new telling, become a weapon you had been sharpening all along. Somewhere beyond your view, your shared history is being rewritten, and you were never asked to weigh in. This runs deeper than ordinary cruelty and deeper than the typical work of protecting one's image. Jung gave this mechanism a name: projection, the unconscious act of taking the parts of yourself that you cannot tolerate holding, the shame, the smallness, the quiet terror of being unremarkable, and casting them onto someone else so they can be despised from a safe distance. For years, your empathy offered the ideal surface for this. You were open enough to absorb whatever they needed to release. And across your softness, they could write themselves a borrowed nobility. Behind that flattering invention, they could keep their own worthlessness out of sight. You were not understood, you were written upon, and you mistook the pressure of the pen for being truly seen. Your departure tears that page away, and everything they had projected onto you now has nowhere left to settle. It cannot simply float there unattached. So the story must shift, and shift quickly, because the alternative is unbearable. Your boundary transforms into their cruelty. Your exhaustion transforms into your selfishness. Your silence transforms into proof that you were always the cold one, the one who vanished without warning, the one incapable of love. Each revision performs a single task beneath the surface. It keeps the disowned material out of their own hands and firmly fastened onto yours. They have to make you the monster. If you are not the villain, then they are not the victim. And to a mind like this, that outcome is worse than guilt itself. But notice what this rewriting is actually creating while it works. Not merely a story released into the world, but a draft. They are constructing a version of you small enough to fit inside their resentment, simple enough to bear full blame. And they are quietly beginning to preserve it. This is the first stone of something they will never reveal to another living soul. Hold on to that shrunken, editable version of you. We will return to it. And when we do, it will turn out to be the entire point. Give it some time. The narrative has finished its work out in the world, and your own days have begun closing back over the wound. You make coffee in a peaceful kitchen. You laugh at something trivial, and the lightness of that laugh catches you off guard. A friend says you seem like yourself again, and for a few hours you allow yourself to believe it. Hold on to that ordinary morning, because something quieter follows, harder to name, and far harder to shake off. The sensation of being watched, a figure that should not be observing anyway, from somewhere just out of sight. A question passed along through a friend that is far too specific to be casual. A presence at the boundary of a space you never expected them to occupy, gone the moment you turned to look, leaving you uncertain whether you saw anything at all. If they have decided you are the monster, if the narrative is finished and the verdict delivered, then why does their attention still linger at the border of your life? The instinct is to reinterpret it as feeling. Maybe they still care. Maybe beneath everything, this is love that cannot speak its own name. It is neither of those. Believing it is will keep you bound for years. Jung supplied the word for what is genuinely moving here, the shadow. By shadow, he wrote, I mean the inferior side of the personality, the sum of all those unpleasant qualities we prefer to conceal. It is everything the polished persona refused to claim and buried in the dark. And in isolation, it does not stay still. It grows louder precisely because the thing that used to drown it out, your constant attention, is gone. The watching is the shadow's hunger spilling out sideways through whatever opening it can locate. What it seeks was never you as a human being. It wants the significance you use to grant it daily, freely, without ever being asked, which is exactly why the gaze carries such a specific hunger. Their interest was never in your well-being. The single fact they need is whether you have dimmed. They are peering through the keyhole of your visible life to learn one thing only, whether your world shrank once they were removed from it, because a smaller you would resolve the question now devouring them in the dark. It would confirm, after all, that they had mattered. So understand what you are actually witnessing. The question beneath the watching was never how you are doing. What they are hunting for is confirmation that you are still in pain. Your happiness is their notice of eviction. Every sign that you are building something new is interpreted not as good news but as injury, and their attention sharpens in exact proportion to how unburdened you appear. The brighter your morning looks, the longer their eye stays pressed to the keyhole. You have hovered over the block button late at night and pulled back, worried that blocking them would mean you still cared enough to bother. You are not imagining the weight of being watched, and you are not the first person it has quietly tried to dismantle. But surveillance carries a cost, and the shadow is never a source of energy. It is a debt. Eventually, the watching stops feeding them anything at all and starts costing them everything. And that is the point where the entire structure finally begins to fail. There comes a stretch where even the watching falls silent, not because healing occurred, not because some mercy arrived to soften them. It goes quiet because something was used up. The performance has lost its audience, and a performance with empty seats cannot keep covering its own enormous expense. Consider what the persona always required of them every single hour they wore it. Energy, ceaseless, draining energy spent holding a constructed face in place against the inadequacy it was built to disguise. While you remained, that energy came from outside, drawn from your reassurance, your conflict, your worry, your presence in the room. You were the generator, and the generator ran whether you intended it to or not. With you gone permanently, the source is severed, and now the structure has nothing left to draw upon except itself. It begins slowly to consume the very thing it was constructed to shield. Jung borrowed an ancient term for the law that takes hold here, a word he drew from Heraclitus, enantiodromia, the principle stating that any condition pushed far enough toward one extreme eventually reverses into its precise opposite. The performed strength does not simply fade like a dimming light. The total self-reliance, the disdain for needing anyone, the certainty they projected that they required no one, does not gently dissolve. It flips entirely. It becomes the helpless, wordless collapse it was always built to mask. The performed face and the void beneath it were never two distinct things. They were a single thing wearing two expressions. And now the second expression is the one turning slowly into the light. You might even glimpse this from outside, and it will confuse you because it will not resemble suffering. It will resemble a replacement. A new figure appears at their side almost immediately, settled into your former position before the seat has even cooled. The narrative becomes that they moved on, healed overnight, found someone better, read it differently. The speed is the giveaway. A person cannot rebuild a self that quickly. They have simply located a fresh surface to perform against, a new page on which to write the same borrowed identity. And the urgency measures exactly how unbearable it is for them to stand alone in the empty theater. The replacement only resembles recovery. It is closer to someone grabbing a fire extinguisher while their own house is already in flames. The performance has concluded. The theater stands empty. The lights have gone dark, and the actor will not exit the stage. A mind unable to endure that emptiness for even one more night will do something to fill it. It will not go searching for a genuine person to perform for, not at the depth this requires, because a genuine person carries the same intolerable risk you once did. A genuine person can leave. So instead, they take the final available step. Turning inward, back toward the draft they began assembling the very moment you walked out the door. This is the act they will hide from everyone for the remainder of their life. This is what they secretly do. Picture a single specific night in their world. The apartment sits in silence. Whoever replaced you sleeps in another room or was never quite substantial to begin with. They are sitting awake at the kitchen table, phone in hand, though they are not actually using it, and they are speaking not aloud to someone who is not present. Here is the behavior promised at the start, not pursuit, but reconstruction, in the unvisited chamber of their own mind, in rooms no friend or partner will ever be shown. They build you. Not the living, breathing you, currently walking beneath an open sky with your own intentions and your own ordinary morning light. They construct an effigy. It is assembled from torn fragments of the rewritten story, equipped with the disowned shadow traits they could never hold in their own hands, and dressed in imagined exchanges that always, without fail, resolve exactly as needed. And then they begin treating that figure as though it were truly you. Watch what they do with it once it exists. They argue with the effigy and win every single time, because it has no voice of its own and no memory to push back. They idealize it at 3 a.m, grieving a flawless partner who never actually existed in the shape they are now mourning. By daylight they resent it, blaming it for a departure they themselves authored, line by line. They put it on trial, render the verdict, then overturn the verdict, and begin the trial again the following night. The effigy is convenient in the one way you never could be. It cannot grow. It cannot correct the record. It cannot change its position, set a new limit, or leave a second time. It is you, with the freedom surgically extracted. This answers the question that has haunted you from the very first moment. This is why they never needed you to return. Jung argued that we never encounter the world in its raw form, that the mind only ever meets the psychic image it forms of something rather than the thing itself. For most people, the living individual keeps revising that image. You say something unanticipated, you alter your appearance, you decline a request, and the picture held in the other person's mind is forced to adjust against the friction of reality. Remove the real person, and that friction disappears. The image is then free to solidify into whatever best serves whoever holds it. This is the loophole the wounded ego slips through. Unable to reach the living you, it abandons the attempt and elevates the inner portrait to the status of truth. The effigy becomes more real to them than you ever had the chance to be, because the effigy never talks back. So your return would have meant confronting an actual human being who had changed, who now had limits, who remembered everything differently, and who was no longer willing to perform the old role. The effigy requires none of that. It demands nothing and offers everything. So they made the exchange. They traded a living relationship with all its risk of contradiction and surprise and refusal for a private possession they could fully control. They retained the part of you that served their needs and buried the part of you capable of leaving. You walked free beneath an open sky. But in the vault of their mind, a version of you still sits at that table, still answering for things you never did, still held in a captivity that has nothing whatsoever to do with where your actual body resides tonight. They did not lose you when you left. They replaced you with someone who can never refuse them. That is the secret. They constructed a hostage out of memory, and they will continue arguing with that ghost long after your real name has stopped meaning anything to anyone in this world except you. Now turn the lens entirely around, because this was never really about them. For a long time, you have carried a quiet, unpaid burden. You wanted them to understand. You wanted the record corrected, the apology finally given, one clear moment where they would look at you and see exactly what they had done. And on some nights you still wonder whether being the one who left made you the cruel one, whether the guilt that surfaces is proof that you broke something good. The guilt is proof of your decency and nothing else. Set it down. The effigy is the reason that moment will never come. The conversation they are having has not included the real you for a very long time. They are enclosed in a room with a copy, running a trial, in which you are simultaneously the accused and entirely absent. Your real self never once enters that room, which means there has never been anything in there for you to win. Consider one man, because this was never solely a young person's story. He is 63, 31 years married, the house gone silent now, the children grown and scattered elsewhere. He did not leave in one dramatic rupture. He left the way a tide recedes slowly, then suddenly all at once. And on the day the door finally shut, the woman he left said absolutely nothing. He waited for her to speak. He waited for years. What he came to understand too late is the thing you are learning now. The silence was never the start of her understanding. It was the start of her sealing the door on a version of him she could keep. He finally set the waiting down at 63. You do not have to carry yours nearly as long as he carried his, and that sealed room is the precise measure of how free you already are. Jung drew a careful distinction between the small, illuminated circle of the ego and the vast psyche it floats within. Insofar as the ego is only the center of my field of consciousness, he wrote, it is not identical with the totality of my psyche. Set that against everything you have just learned. The version of you they reconstructed is a fragment, a flattened image, simple enough to be smuggled through a keyhole, small enough to lose an argument every single night. The actual you, the complete psyche with all its uncharted depth and its endless capacity to keep evolving, was always far too vast to be captured by anyone. They captured only the outline. They never came close to the center. Jung wrote one more line that names this entire relationship in a single stroke, and it is the line worth carrying with you from here. Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where the will to power dominates, love is absent. Lay that over the years behind you and watch them reorganize themselves. What you have been grieving as a love that somehow failed was never actually a love that failed. It was the will to power wearing love's mask, and power cannot grieve for you. It can only miss the leverage. You were never too much. You did not love too poorly or too late. You were standing inside a structure that, by its very design, held no room left in it for love. So here is the one thing in all of this that they cannot reconstruct, cannot revise, cannot drag through the keyhole into their vault, your freedom. They can keep the rewritten memory. They can resent the effigy and forgive it, and resent it all over again. They can hold the ghost at that table for the rest of their life, if that is their choice. The living you exists somewhere they will never reach, building a morning they have no part in and no claim over. You cannot repair the theater. You were never truly the actor inside it. You can only step away from the screen. Let them keep the ghost. You have the open road. Walk on. So before you close this out, leave one thing behind for the next person who discovers it inside their own silence. If you walked away and they are still arguing with a version of you that stopped existing the day you left, write this somewhere they might one day find it, and somewhere you will always mean it. Let them keep the ghost. I kept myself.